It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We're streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 as well. And today we're going to start the show a little bit differently than we typically would on a Thursday. Often on Thursdays, we let you hear pretty much straight away from Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt, and we'll still let you hear from them throughout the show, and specifically at 6 o'clock in our Pick 6 at 6. But, Anthony, I thought that we would start the show today by doing something that we've never done before, which is to revisit an old 1st and 10. Because it's rare. Like, we get rematches, and maybe this is something that if we like it, we can do it next year on the divisional games where we play teams a second time, or when the Commanders play teams a second time. But as we work into this wild card weekend, where the Commanders are going to take on the Buccaneers, the team that they faced in Week 1, I thought, what better way to try to go back and remember what we actually talked about Week 1 than going back and looking at the notes. And I write out the 1st and 10, so we didn't have to even go like transcribe it or anything. We just go back and look at the list. So I say that's what we do to start the show today.
Hey, look, I'm with it, man. And guess what, Craig? We're 3-0 in rematch games. Just saying.
Whoa. Look at the stats that Anthony Haney is bringing to the program. Well, let's see what's relevant, because I think there's some stuff that's relevant and some stuff that's going to be not quite as relevant. And in fact, the first one, Anthony, and we can go full effects here. You ready?
Number 1.
Ooh. The first thing that I wrote down is, because remember, this was a loss. So I go, we're going to need to multitask all year long. We need to be able to evaluate games as they are and in the context of the larger project at hand here. Realistically, this game, not good for both. The stated goal for the short term is to establish a play style, play fast, play physical, communicate well. That wasn't good enough, which is something Dan Quinn would admit. I think looking back, it's not a bad observation. And luckily, like, that's something that we've had to do a little bit less of. We've been able to look at games a little bit more as they are. But I think we've also done a good job of multitasking and saying, like, yeah, no, the receiving talent maybe hurt a little bit here. Or next year when they have a better corner 2 or whatever. Like, a lot of the problems they've had this year have been areas where we say, hey, they'll work on that long term, and that's okay. It's understandable why they have that. But I think the other thing is, like, on the play style front, that was an issue Week 1. It basically hasn't been an issue since Week 3. I think the offensive line, they want to be a little bit more physical. Defensive line, they probably want to be a little bit more physical as time goes on. But generally speaking, like, they show up, they hit people. The missed tackles that were a huge issue in Week 1 have not been an issue. They're the 5th best tackling team in the league by most metrics. So I think that overall, like, good observation. And luckily, Anthony, part of the reason that they've gone 12-5 and 12-4 since Week 1 is because some of that stuff changed.
Yeah, definitely a lot of it changed. And I think Week 1 is also just a tough game to, like, evaluate, just because you don't have a lot of tape on these teams. You know, people come in with different schemes, different philosophies, and things of that nature. So I think also when you factor that in, you got to credit some of that to like, I guess, the loss. And then also we had a whole bunch of, like, moving pieces, moving parts.
Oh, we're going to get there.
Their first game playing together.
For sure, we're going to get there. The second thing, though, I said.
Number 2.
There we go. The second thing. It was also more big picture. I made a joke about how they have finished Fridays and they did not have a finished Sunday. Because on third downs in that game, they were horrendous. And part of it was penalties. Like, the first third down in the game is a 3rd and 1 where they forced an incompletion on a fade to Mike Evans, and Cleveland Ferrell picks up a silly hands to the face penalty. He and the offensive lineman, I think it was Tristan Wirfs, just they're mashing each other, and Ferrell's hands slip up and pop dude in the helmet, and it's first down. There's a couple others that are first downs on penalty. Then there's a ton of conversions. And so I think Tampa was really aggressive on third down and took advantage of some stuff with Washington, and they just didn't finish drives. They also didn't finish sacks. They got a ton of pressure on Baker in that game, and they did not sack him very many times, if at all. So they have got to make sure that when you collapse the pocket against Mayfield, you don't give him anywhere to go, because he is real slippery in the pocket, and he's also actually the 7th leading rusher in terms of scrambling yardage by quarterbacks this year. Of course, Jaden is number 1, but Baker's 7th. So he'll run on you, he'll squirm around in the pocket and dart a ball down the field on you. And so sometimes that was the cause of both, like why he would do that on a third down. But then offensively, they also just didn't finish on third downs. And that was a huge, huge key in that game. And they've obviously been much better since then, but they've also had their moments, I think, since then.
Yeah, and I think Joe Ware, and we'll hear from him later today, but he just talked about Baker just always, keeping the play alive. And sometimes when he's scrambling to throw as opposed to just take off. So
let me see if I can pull this up real quick. His outside the pocket numbers this year
crazy
are like truly historic levels of good. Let me pull this up real quick because this is worth the slight delay here on the old radio. We want to search the term outside. There we go. Baker Mayfield completed 34 of his 47 passes outside the pocket for 406 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception this season. Good for the highest completion percentage on such passes in a season in the next-gen stats era. So I believe that's back to either 2016 or 2018. It might even go further back than that. So he is 72% outside the pocket. He threw outside the pocket on just 10% of his attempts this season, the 4th lowest rate in the NFL. So when he gets outside the pocket, or he doesn't always do this, it's just when he does, he's deadly. The Commanders allowed the 5th lowest completion percentage and the 4th fewest yards per attempt on passes thrown from outside the pocket this season. So the Commanders have done a good job when guys get outside the pocket of plastering, of applying pressure, of doing the things you got to do to bring that number down. But Baker has been an absolute killer when he gets outside the pocket. And he's really good, again, maneuvering within the pocket. So that finish of can you actually finish sacks, that's a huge one on top of the other ways you need to finish plays in this game. And then my third takeaway.
Number 3.
From week 1's edition of First and 10 as we look back at that game and see what's still relevant on this one. I wrote down, I have not lost faith in the plan because I still trust the people in charge. I can't say I expect a bunch of stuff to happen, watch it happen, then be like, oh my God, how did that happen? Which, again, I think that's actually applied a lot more than you might first realize because they were 0-1 and we're thinking man, this might be a rough season on the old wins and losses. And they went 12-5. But I think often when we would get really frustrated with this team, my question would be, Anthony, how often did we get frustrated with stuff that we didn't see coming, right? Most of the frustration is hey, Benjamin St. Juste can't cover number 1 wide receivers. And it's yeah, no kidding. It's, hey, Nick Allegretti is not the best guard in the NFL. Okay, got it. I don't feel like there was a ton after week 3. And there's one guy in particular in Terry McLaurin who the first couple weeks was pretty frustrating. And there's been a couple of times this year where he gets lost in a game and you're just where is 17? And I'll talk a little bit more about him next in the context of what's changed between week 1 and now. But by and large, I think a lot of the stuff that we've been frustrated with at times this year through the winning, which there has been way more than the losing, has been stuff we predicted. So, honestly, that's kind of played out the way I thought in a lot of ways. And I think on this show, at least, we've done a good job of being only so much you can do in 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the questions that we had, Forbes, Jamin, some of the guys that, necessarily aren't here now, they've sort of kind of been answered. And we've been forced to make changes. And that change has us, in a good position to go down to Tampa and really, challenge these guys again. So I'm looking forward to it.
For sure. All right, when we get back, we'll roll through the rest of them. A lot more of the 4 through 10 on these, Anthony, were personnel related. So we'll get to talk about a lot more players, a lot less philosophy, if you will, next. We're looking back at week 1 against Tampa to see what's still relevant as we head into week 1 of the playoffs against Tampa on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. Always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Coming up at 5 p.m., Melissa Stark, sideline reporter for Sunday Night Football on NBC, will join us. Of course, she was on the sidelines for Washington and Atlanta Sunday night when the Commanders clinched, and she'll be there again this weekend in Tampa with Mike Tirico and Chris Collinsworth on the call for the Commanders' wild card playoff bout against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Our pal Dan Bazzuta previews the entirety of wild card weekend, coming up with us in about 12 minutes or so from right now. Never read the comments, a good one today at 5:30, so we got a bunch of great stuff coming up on the show. Right now, though, we are working through the 1st and 10 from earlier in the season. If you don't listen typically on Mondays, 1st and 10 is the segment we do in the first segment of the show. First segment, 10 observations. And so what did we write down, / what did I write down about this Tampa-Washington matchup in Week 1 that we find still relevant here in the Wild Card Weekend, Week 1 of the playoffs?
Number 4.
The fourth thing I wrote down, Anthony, was in the short term, a lot of what we saw was expected. The corners struggled against great wide receivers, and young talent that was worth seeing against 2 All-Pros, how they do. The answer was not great in Emmanuel Forbes and Benjamin St-Juste. We needed more from the non-Terry McLaurin wide receivers. And it was harder for Jaden Daniels to read a Todd Bowles defense than it was for him to read the vanilla defense that he saw in the preseason. I actually also made a pretty funny note, which is to say that I want players to play more in the preseason next year. Please remind me of this next preseason. So a lot of what happened Week 1, although it's not great and it wound up being wholly unindicative of what this team became, I think was pretty expected. I think we've kind of covered most of that ground, or we're about to when we get into the individual guys.
Number 5.
I did think the preseason note was kind of funny, though. Remind me next year. I like preseason football. All right. So we don't need to spend a ton of time on this because this guy is not relevant anymore. But it is a big story of the season. Emmanuel Forbes. I had made a note before he wound up getting benched in this game that he wasn't playing hard enough, that he wasn't as aggressive in tackling, that he wasn't doing the things that they asked him to do, the Dan Quinn play style. And it's why he ultimately got benched, Anthony, and it's why he ultimately got cut. And I think it's important to remember that when we watch this team struggle and feel like they're a corner, if not 2 corners short, I won't say they didn't have a choice, but they made the extraordinarily worthwhile and easy to explain calculation that the first-round pick from last year was worth seeing if they could coach up. Turns out he wasn't, and then they ultimately trade for Marshawn Lattimore, which is kind of the Forbes replacement, and then we'll see how he does, and they'll obviously try to find another corner, I would think, this offseason, try to kick Mikey back inside. But so much of what the consternation about the cornerback position and them ultimately having to use a resource in a third-round pick and the other pieces involved in that trade to get Marshawn Lattimore come from Emmanuel Forbes' failure here in D.C. And boy, was it on display Week 1.
Yeah. Just thinking back to, the Forbes experience, man, did Ron get that wrong. He got it wrong, man.
Well, it's funny because, in the comments, maybe we'll get to some of these and never read the comments today. Some people are like, man, after watching Michael Davis, why did they cut Forbes? And I'm like, because he was worse? People just keep wanting to say that the guy that the Commanders put out there is the worst corner they've ever seen. And I'm like, I know it's not good, but y'all your memories are that long, some of you guys. Because the funniest thing is the people who don't have a memory that's 4 centimeters long and respond to those comments and are like, yeah, okay, Davis can't cover. Forbes couldn't cover or tackle. Or hey, BSJ is terrible. It's like Davis can't cover. At least BSJ does some good stuff. It's so funny to watch these people just have a competition to see who can be the most the most flagrant in their comments, torching the Commanders DBs. And unfortunately, those aren't the only people torching the Commanders DBs, which brings us to
Number 6.
and BSJ. And a very interesting quote from Dan Quinn after the game. So as a reminder, in this game, BSJ largely played a pretty good game, but in the true BSJ fashion, gave up a couple of really big plays. He gave up 2 touchdowns to Mike Evans on 2 fade routes where he's in fantastic position and the ball just seemingly goes through him and Mike Evans makes a great catch because that's what Mike Evans does is make these big, great contested catches at the catch point. And that's also what Benjamin St-Juste does is give up these great contested catches at the catch point. And that led to this from Dan Quinn. Anthony, you have the bite on your side, yes? This from Dan Quinn in the postgame.
Yeah, we just rotated people around, and I think like it comes from a place of competing and knowing how to and knowing when to make the right decisions into those spaces. And so that's what we'll work on. Technique-wise, like usually you ask a player, what'd you see? And if they know how to correct it already, then you're in a good spot. And that was Ben on the first touchdown to Evans. You need to turn the other way. I need to look, okay, you got it. If you ask a player, I don't know, that's a bigger concern. And so those guys know the things they need to work on, and that's why it did sting. And there was a lot for us to work on. But third downs, Nick, I would say collectively defensive. I wouldn't put it on one versus the other.
So there you go. I think the interesting thing about that quote with the benefit of hindsight is it just continued to be a lot of the same stuff from St-Juste all year long. And while I think he was better this year than he was last year, like he was more good more often, the lapses are still the same lapses I think that he's had. And it's just some of this will probably continue to get better throughout his career. Some of this is penalties he picks up, some of which are legit calls, and some of which are he has a reputation for being grabby and handsy, and officials call it tight on him. And some of it is just kind of going to be who he is as a player for the rest of his career because he's not one of the best corners in the NFL. He's not the worst corner in the NFL. He's somewhere in the middle and maybe even below the average mark. And I think that's probably fair to say based off of his production this year. I mean, his PFF grade is terrible, but they kill you for penalties. So, yeah, that's kind of where it is. And every time they've tried to move away from him, something has happened to bring him back, whether it's the Marshawn Lattimore injury or, other players play that they realize, actually, this is our best option. I guess we're just going to have to hold our nose with it. And I'd imagine that they probably don't bring him back next year because he's in the final year of his contract. But that was BSJ in week 1. Thanks.
Number 7.
All right, number 7, I talked about Jaden. I talked about how the first half was very scramble-filled. Really, that game was scramble-filled. But one of the things that I also wrote down as a note that has come up a ton this year is his ability to make a negative into a positive was on display in this game. How sometimes he'll take on pressure and be running around, and then you're like, oh, this 5-yard sack or 10-yard sack just turned into a 20-yard gain. That's pretty cool. Also, the missed opportunities, which he's gotten better and better at all year. So this was an interesting Jaden game. And the other random thing from Jaden in this game, Anthony, remember his helmet came off twice?
Yep.
Haven't been a problem with that. They got the right helmet size for the rest of the year.
That's a plus then.
It's fantastic.
Number 8.
Shout out to the equipment staff. Terry's day, I had written down, should have been like 4 to 5 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was wide open a couple times in this game. And this was early in the season, I think, before Cliff and that staff really understood, and Jaden to an extent, really understood what they had in Terry McLaurin. Where eventually in week 3, they were kind of like, this guy's our best player. We've got to get him the ball. And it was like someone got in Jaden's ear and was like, look, man, I know he doesn't look like he's open. Just throw him the ball. Let's see what happens. And Terry was like, hey, guess what? I'm the best contested catch guy in the whole entire league, which statistically is true by a number of different metrics. He's a leader in this and that and this and that. And one of them is touchdowns on close catches, like low separation, high production. He's just excellent at that. And in this game, he also will win deep. And this game, there's just not enough trust between Jaden and Terry, something that clearly developed very quickly, and something that I think will be emphasized this weekend is it always is. I mean, Terry last week could have had a much bigger first half if Jaden pulls the trigger on a couple. And then Marcus obviously force feeds him in the second half, and including 2 of the best, over-the-middle, tough, underrated, if you know type of catches you'll see and on the final drive of the game. Catches a slant and a dig that he has no business catching on either, and he caught both of them.
Number 8.
Number 8 on our observation list from week 1. That was number 8.
Number 9.
Number 9 on our observation list from week 1 was, I wrote, Cliff is awake. And that has been a theme this year. When this offense gets in a run, they will pull a trick out of the bag. And he will make sure, like, he just will not say, we're going to keep running our offense. Like, he will find a trick play. He'll find a new formation. He'll find a new whatever to try to get the offense going. And so, like, I've forgotten that was something that goes back as far as week 1, but it definitely did.
Number 10.
And unfortunately, defensive cohesion is something that has gotten a lot better since week 1. The communication, not losing guys in stacks and bunches and all these types of things. It was a bit of a problem last week. Luckily, Trey Lance missed a couple of throws. But I also think part of that was Quan Martin was out, and he's one of their best communicators. So much, much harder task for Tampa's offense against this version of the Commanders' defense on just simple formational stuff. But Liam Cohen is also one of the best OCs in the business this year at putting defenders in conflict. So I think that's going to be fun to watch this weekend as well. I feel like that was a good list in hindsight, Anthony.
No, it definitely was. And I think when you just look at the tape from week 1 and look at the tape now, it's two totally different teams.
Very, very different
Two
teams.
totally.
Tampa's different, but they're not nearly as different. And they were also a team that's now won the division 4 straight years. They've got a ton of experience. I want to talk about that factor with Melissa Stark coming up at 5 o'clock, someone who's covered a ton of playoff games in her career. But coming up next, one key to every game in Wild Card Weekend. Dan Pizzuta has the keys, and he joins us next. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We're streaming live on YouTube if you'd like to give us a watch at the Team 980. And joining us now, as he does each and every Thursday during the football season, it's our buddy Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd Team. Pizzuta, what's up, dude? How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. I'm excited for Wild Card Weekend. We got a bunch of great games, and if we can dive into your knowledge at this level, I would like to just go through game by game and get like one or two keys for each game. Let's skim the top here. Let's get into it a little bit. Maybe we don't even skim the top. Maybe we dive deep into one particular area of each game. How's that sound to you?
It sounds great.
All right, let's do it. And I think chronological order is probably the easiest one to do because then I don't have to think about it. And also, it means we get Texans and Chargers out of the way first. The annual Houston Texans playoff spot, 4:30 on Saturday. The Chargers are in Houston. Houston's defense is very good. Houston's offense is very bad. The Chargers, I think people think of them one way. Maybe the numbers say they're actually a little bit different kind of team. What do you think ultimately is the biggest deciding factor here?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the run game on each side of the ball here, because this is a Texans team that has been just exactly kind of what it has been throughout the entire season. It is a very inefficient run game that still leans into it heavily on first and second down. And if they're going to continue to do that, that's going to put them in long third downs, which is how they have faced a lot of their problems this year. And that's something that the Chargers are going to tee off on. On the other side, the run game that interests me is what Justin Herbert is going to do with his legs. There have been a couple of games this year where Herbert was at his best when he had a very high scramble rate. And I think when we kind of have some frustrations with Justin Herbert, it's because he's so robotic in his progressions that it's 1 to 2 to check down. And he, checks the ball down a little more than, a quarterback with his type of arm should. But there were a couple games this year where he was way more aggressive in taking off and scrambling. I think that really set the floor of that offense to be much higher than it was. Houston's one of the worst teams in the league against quarterback scrambles this year. So if that is something that is going to open up that Chargers offense, I think that's something that's going to keep them on the field. As you know, watching this Washington team of how much a quarterback's legs can take off there. So if Herbert is willing to do that, I think that's really going to be a tough thing for Houston to stop on defense.
I'm so glad you said that because I heard that stat earlier. Mina Kimes, I was listening to her pod, and she talked about that. Her and Solak were talking about how Houston's run defense against like design running back runs is one of the, I think they're top 3 in the NFL. And then they're one of the 3 worst in the NFL against quarterback scrambles. And Herbert's a guy, especially in a playoff game, that is more than capable of taking off. I would assume they tell him like, hey man, look for opportunities to take off. And it's funny because we think of obviously a Greg Roman offense all those years in Baltimore and San Francisco, and Jim Harbaugh, what he wants to be is like this pound, just pound the rock, incessantly run the football team, and they're way more efficient passing the football. And I think knowing that, if they know, hey, break glass or in case of emergency and scramble, maybe they drop him back a little more and just say, hey, like, we're going to let you try to cook a little bit. If it's not there, take off running. There'll be lanes, and they can live in a way that is very different than what we'd expect considering the coaching staff in LA.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in those games kind of in the middle of the season too, I think he just looked more comfortable too. I think there was much more of a looseness in how he was playing. And he wasn't, forced to, throw some tight window throws that he might have had to do, earlier in the season. I think now if you combined the success they had scrambling in that midseason stretch and the passing offense that they've had over these past 3 games, I mean, they've really only played one good defense, but that was against a Broncos defense that ended up being, the best defense in the league by the end of the year. So if you take kind of what they figured out with Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson, who I think is now questionable to play, but has been looking good over the past couple of games. If you take their passing offense that really has figured some things out and then add in what Herbert can do with his legs, I think that's going to be a really tough offensive stop.
Dan Pizzuta, 33rd team with us here on the Hoffman Show. Of course, on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Many of these games, by the way, you can listen to this weekend here on the Team 980 thanks to the good folks at Westwood One. All right, so Saturday night, you have the divisional matchup between the Steelers and the Ravens. It feels like they just played on a Saturday night. It feels like I don't remember the last time the Steelers or the Ravens played on a Sunday. They've played like Christmas. They played Saturday. They played all over the place. But they're going to play Saturday night on Amazon Prime Video. The Ravens are 9.5-point favorites, which on some level feels exactly right, and on some level feels absolutely insane considering the Pittsburgh, Baltimore rivalry. What do you think is ultimately the decider here in this third matchup between these two teams this season?
Yeah, so I think if this game is going to be close, it's going to have to come from Pittsburgh finding success in the deep pass, which is what they did the first couple of games that Russell Wilson came into the lineup. And that was really how they were getting that offense to go. A lot of the Russell Wilson moon balls. He had I think 18.5% explosive pass rate over his first 7 games, which is insane. And obviously that did not keep up. And that kind of goes with George Pickens being out too and not being healthy. But his explosive pass rate has dropped to just where am I here? 8.3% since
so that's
week 14.
10% lower than it was.
Yes, and so not only is the deep ball not working quite as well, it was easily the most efficient during that first stretch. Over the second stretch now, not only is it less efficient, they're throwing the ball deep less often also. It dropped from about 15% to 11%. So that's a pretty deep drop too. And there is not a lot of, structure and a lot of other things that this Pittsburgh passing offense can do to make up for that. And a lot of what their efficiency was those big plays were just really carrying them throughout most of that early stretch of Wilson starting. The thing about trying to refine that deep ball right now is Baltimore has turned into the best deep passing defense in the league since they put Kyle Hamilton back as more of a full-time safety, and they've started to figure out what that defense can be. Right now, Baltimore, we're third in EPA per play and first in success rate against the deep pass since week 10. So when you really only have one thing on offense that's working for you, and it turns out to be one of the best things that the defense you're playing defends against, I think that's going to be tough for Pittsburgh, but if they are going to stay in it, I think that's how they're going to have to do it because there's not a lot else going on for that offense.
Well, and George Pickens is the biggest enigma in the NFL. Some weeks you can be like, oh, is that the guy the best receiver in football? He's making the greatest catches I've ever seen. And other weeks it just looks like he's point shaving. It is truly, I don't know what you do with that if you're Mike Tomlin. I know if I wouldn't want that in my building. I want guys that I can rely upon, but they're kind of built to rely on George Pickens, and thus their results are that of a team that relies on a guy as enigmatic as George Pickens.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of seems like that's been what the Steelers have done at wide receiver forever. And because it seems like Steelers receivers become more enigmas after they leave Pittsburgh. So the fact that they can kind of handle Pickens, and he does have some of these stretches where he is good. And maybe if you are Pittsburgh, you're hoping that his return from injury, now that he's got, I think 2 games now under his belt since returning, you might have a little more of him playing at full strength, more to his full capacity. I think that's it. Pittsburgh, that's kind of what you're hoping for. You kind of have to lean on it because I really don't think they have a lot else.
Dan Pizzuta, 3013 with us. And as I scroll down the schedule here, there's a Tyreek Hill story on the right. And because we were talking about it, I was like, oh, great. Is Tyreek Hill about to become a Steeler? Because that just feels perfect. Those two teams have done business before with Minka Fitzpatrick. Tyreek Hill, Steeler for 2 years before Mike Tomlin and he are fighting on the sideline. Just feels like the next step in that, Steelers wide receiver sequence in Tyreek Hill's career. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think that
that would fit the mold at least.
It would, yes. I think for Miami, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense financially for them to get out of the Tyreek Hill contract for this season. So I don't expect that to actually be a reality. But if that does end up being the case, I wouldn't be surprised if Pittsburgh ends up being a potential landing spot.
All right, Dan Pizzuta is with us, 33rd Team. Again, you can read his work there, including his First and 10 column that he does every week. Broncos and Bills. This line has actually come down a little bit. It opened in the 9s. It's now down to 8.5. The Bills hosting the Broncos, who are coming off just an absolute shellacking of what the Chiefs. I'm going to call them the Chiefs. Some guys in Chiefs uniforms. What do you think the ultimate key to this one is? Is Denver now has to legitimately face arguably the best player in the sport with Josh Allen and the way that he's playing?
Yeah, so I am interested to see how Buffalo does go about offense and how they want to attack Denver's defense, which, again, like I said, finished the season first in EPA per play, first in success rate. They were easily the best defense in the league this year. What Buffalo has done and what has been really great over the past, year and a half with Joe Brady is, as great as Josh Allen is, and we can see he's taken over games when he needs to, they have built the type of offense where he does not necessarily need to do that. For so long, they did not have this run game that they could lean on, when they needed to take some pressure off. But now that they have that, their first game in the playoffs is going to be against a team that was easily the best run defense in the league. I know we have a lot of good things about their pass defense, but this run defense was great. So I don't know if that's what you want to lean into against Denver. So now you're going to be asking Josh Allen to kind of have the whole weight of the passing offense on his shoulders against a team that's going to be playing a lot of man coverage, which is not necessarily something that your wide receivers are going to be great at beating. I do like a lot of what they have at receiver, but if you're asking, a Khalil Shakir to be beating a Pat Surtain every snap, it might not work out so much. So how Buffalo figures out the balance of what they're going to be doing on offense is going to be very good. Josh Allen was still first in EPA per play against man coverage, but it is just individually per receiver, they're not as strong as they are against zone. So how just Buffalo goes against figuring out how to attack the Broncos. I just find that going to be a very interesting push and pull.
How much of Buffalo's success against the run Denver's success against the run is structural, and how much of that structure is because they have Surtain? In other words, are they just loading up the box knowing we can play man coverage, we can play single high stuff, and Surtain's got his side of the field on lock? Or is it something else that has allowed them to be as successful as they are against the run this year?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So right now they have a league average stack box rate. The league average is 22.1%. They are at 22.6. So they're not overly, committing there. They do blitz a lot. So they have, a lot of guys kind of around the line of scrimmage, and that's for the run and the pass, even when, the actual box, isn't stacked. But it is something where that interior of that defensive line is so good right now. Zach Allen has been incredible. I think he'll probably end up on an all-pro team. I think if enough people were paying attention, DJ Jones, that interior of the defensive line just creates a lot of penetration. Their edge rushers are also very good at stopping the run. So they have a very good first line of defense there that doesn't allow a lot of things to get into the second level. And I think that's, and when you have some good corners who can tackle too. Like Pat Surtain is probably one of the best, probably the best tackling cornerback in the league right now. And that's something that, not all defense, really no other defense has when you kind of look at tackling league-wide for defensive backs. So when you kind of have all of those players who can, charge up to the ball, don't miss a lot of tackles, that's helped them a lot in the run game.
Yeah, Pat Surtain's the best everything corner in football. He's a weapon. Should probably win Defensive Player of the Year. That's my vote, but I don't have an actual vote, so whatever.
It would be mine also. I also don't have one, but
you should. I shouldn't. But we can talk about that another time. Dan Pizzuto's with us here on the Hoffman Show. All right, Packers and Eagles. Dan, this line is only 4.5, which I think is interesting because I think a lot of people look at the Eagles and are like, man, this team is one of the absolute best in football. They're super talented. You're presuming that Hurts is going to play, and the Packers have been, obviously really good at times, but seem to be sputtering a little bit lately. They just lost to the Bears. So is there something that we're missing here that Vegas thinks this is going to be a little bit closer than I think a lot of casual fans would guess?
Yeah, I kind of think so, because I think a lot of people are downplaying how good the Packers have been. And I know you kind of said at times, but they ended up third in weighted DVOA. Which more heavily weights games at the end of the season, even though they did lose last week. They lost the previous week also, but they have played very well. They're one of the few teams that has been very good on offense, very good on defense. And so they're third in weighted DVOA. The Eagles are fourth. So I think these are slightly even matched teams. in some sense. I am a little concerned about what Jalen Hurts is going to look like. It's, 2.5 weeks now in concussion protocol. So he is expected to be cleared, and we are going to see him play. But I would be a little hesitant on what that could potentially look like. But I think what I'm really looking forward to in this game is what the Eagles are going to do defensively. We kind of know Vic Fangio is a very, zone heavy, has the two deep in quarters, but they've been more willing to change it up when needed. And the Packers have a very big man coverage split when Christian Watson is on the field and when Christian Watson is not on the field. And Watson tore his ACL in the season finale, so he is not going to be playing. And Love averages 0.08 EPA per play against man with him, negative 0.32 without him. So he is someone who can stretch the field, kind of gives a little more of something that you have to worry about down the field, opens up some space for some of those other receivers. So if the Eagles, who now have some very good cornerbacks who they do trust to play man coverage, if they're going to be a little more aggressive there, I think it might be a little harder for Green Bay to be able to do what they want to do on offense. Love has been one of the best quarterbacks in the league against zone coverage this year. So if they just kind of play like they normally have, I think the Packers have some success. But if they get a little more aggressive, play some more man, I think that might slow down the Packers a little more.
Definitely going to be interesting to watch. All right, we'll save the Commanders game for last, so that would be next chronologically, but we skip to Monday. Vikings and Rams. Minnesota just 1-point favorites here. Why do you agree that the Rams can keep this one really close? To me, it just feels like depends on which Rams team shows up. But which Rams team do you think we get against a Vikings team that's coming off a really tough loss to Detroit?
Yeah, that'll be super interesting because the Rams were a team where if you looked at what they did a couple weeks ago against Buffalo, you're like, how could anyone stop this offense? They can put up points whenever they need to. And then over the next 3 weeks, they barely put up any points. So I think that they are still kind of figuring out what exactly they want to do. I think we talked, earlier in the season about, the pistol offense and how a lot of teams were leaning into that. And that was something the Rams were doing a lot. That was what had their back half of the season improvement last year. And they did it for about the first half of the season this year. But since the midpoint this year, they've kind of gone back to the 2021 offense with Stafford a lot more in empty and spreading things out horizontally. And that's been hit or miss, but they've been putting a lot more on Stafford's shoulders. And it's worked out sometimes. It hasn't quite in the others. I think that might be good against a Brian Flores defense, which wants to throw as many bodies around the line of scrimmage as possible, will try to confuse you about who is coming. I posted a graph today on Twitter and Blue Sky about defenses that are either blitzing or sending a sim pressure. And sim pressure is just, it looks like it's going to be a blitz, but it only ends up being 4. But usually that 4th rusher is not a traditional rusher. So it's still someone who, would come on a blitz, but someone who would typically be a normal pass rusher dropping into coverage. The Vikings do that on 86.1% of their defensive plays, and that is easily the highest in the league. So you just don't know what they're going to be doing. But if you are spread out and empty, it kind of forces the defense to declare a little bit. They can't have so much, deception along the defensive line. So I'm going to be very interested to see just how the Rams are able to kind of stop the Vikings from doing what they want to do on defense. And if they can kind of spread them out, handle that a little bit, I think this game could be a little closer.
All right, then last but not least, Dan, what everyone's been waiting for, the Dan Pizzuta key to the game for the Commanders and Buccaneers. Of course, if you want more from Dan on all these games, you can check out his work at the 33rd team. But I think a lot of people have talked about blitz rates and Jaden versus pressure and the amount of unblocked pressures and how heavily the Buccaneers are blitzing. But there's a lot of other things that you could point to in this game as well. What do you think ultimately is the biggest factor?
I just want to know if either of these defenses is going to get a stop at any point in this game. And I think if there's one, that might shift the game, because I think if you kind of look at where the strengths and weaknesses of both of these defenses are and how these offenses are playing right now, I think this definitely has the best chance to be the highest scoring game of the weekend. Just I think we kind of know what the Commanders can do. And like you said, there's a heavy blitzing from Tampa Bay. That's something Todd Bowles likes to do, but it's also something he's leaned into more because cornerback injuries and the defensive backs have just been not as good in Tampa, so they kind of have to rely on that. I think that's going to be something where Jaden Daniels can have some quick passes over the middle, also is something where he's going to use his legs. Tampa Bay right now, they have been their best when they have gotten the ball out quickly. A lot of that has come from a great designed screen game. But what's interesting, what actually surprised me when I was looking into this, Washington's defense was first in EPA per play against screens. It tied for third in success rate and seventh in yards per pass against screens. I wasn't expecting them to be quite as good. So if they can slow that down, that's very interesting. But also Tampa Bay has been at its best when it's gotten to the quick passing game, even without screens. Washington's defense was 32nd in EPA per play against passes that were under 2.5 seconds. So I think when you can kind of get into space against Washington's defense, and that's something that I think Tampa Bay is going to be doing often, I just think there's going to be a lot of offensive strength against defensive weakness in this game. And I think whoever can get maybe a stop or two, that might be enough to really flip the game.
Yeah, for sure. Baker leads the NFL, I think, by a decent margin, even in yardage on passes completed behind the line of scrimmage, which is also a funny thing to say, or always a funny thing to say. It's like a lot of yardage, ball just doesn't go far. And Washington, I didn't know they were that good against screens, but I would have guessed they were pretty good because they have a bunch of corners who will come up and hit, led by Sanders still. And teams think they can take advantage of him because he's small, and then he comes up and socks someone in the mouth. And it's like, oh, never mind. Let's try the other side perhaps. And then, you got Luvu and all these really athletic front guys and Wagner obviously has seen every screen that's ever been designed. So definitely going to be interesting to watch. Dan, appreciate your time as always, sir. We'll talk to you next week. Hopefully you have a chance to preview another Commanders game. We'll see how things go on Sunday night. And appreciate your time as always, sir.
All right. Thank you. Sounds good.
That's Dan Pizzuta, everybody, with us here on The Hoffman Show. Dan, of course, writing for the 33rd team. You can check his work out there. All kinds of great data always and really good. Does a really great job of making sense of that data as well. Coming up next, though, Melissa Stark, NBC Sports sideline reporter for Sunday Night Football. She joins us. She talked to Terry McLaurin this afternoon, so you get your first dibs on hearing what she talked with Terry about, plus some of the other big storylines from this game. We'll talk through with Melissa next here on The Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. 5 o'clock, it is time for Not My Beat.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not My Beat.
Today, joining us from NBC Sports, she's the sideline reporter for Sunday Night Football. Been covering the NFL for a long time. Does a fantastic job. She, of course, was on the sidelines when the Commanders clinched, and she'll be there this weekend when the Commanders take on the Bucs in Tampa. It's Melissa Stark. The game, 8 o'clock on NBC and Peacock. Melissa, thanks so much for joining the show. Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And it is my understanding, Melissa, that you earlier before talking to me talked to Terry McLaurin, and I'm sure we'll hear lots more about that conversation on the broadcast Sunday. But anything in particular stand out that you can share with us now as he prepares for his second career playoff game?
Well, I think, he's so excited, first of all, and he's had so much fun this season, and rightfully so. But I think, I was just talking to him about setting the single season franchise record for most receiving touchdowns, and he's so proud of that. I mean, I think he said he didn't think going into the season, if you'd asked him, he sets goals for himself, right? And he set a bunch of goals about, how many receiving yards, this, that, and the other, and, make it to the playoffs and potentially play in a Super Bowl, all this stuff. But if you asked him, he did not think that was going to be a record that he achieved. So super excited about it. Also talked to him about his relationship with Cliff Kingsbury and how much he talks to him during the game and how open Cliff is to his ideas and, okay, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that. And, and how validating that is when, he calls for a certain play and then it works out. So, something to keep. I always try to find things to keep an eye on during the game, some things that we're looking for. So that's definitely something. But I love talking to him just because he's had so many quarterbacks there. And then finally with Jaden, you're seeing what he's capable of. I'm not sure, nationally if he gets the recognition that he has deserved in the past just because of kind of what the organization's gone through and all the quarterbacks that he's gone through. But it's pretty incredible.
I totally agree, and I've been lucky enough to know Terry for a while now since I was back as a beat reporter during his rookie season, and I think it's interesting that he brings up like the relationship, I'm glad you guys talked about the relationship with Cliff, because I don't know if folks realize how many of the big signature plays that Terry has this year are situations where Cliff has gone to Terry and basically been like, what do you want? Because he knows that, like, that's my guy. And, it goes all the way back to the Cincinnati game winner in week 3 on Monday Night Football, where he's like, Terry's like, I want to line up over here. I want to run a go route. And I'm going to score a touchdown. And Terry's good enough to do that. I know you also are working on talking with Mike Evans and some folks about the record that he set that we all saw on Sunday. What's it been like to work on that and talk to some of the folks that you've been talking to about the history that Mike Evans has made?
Yeah, I mean, it's so cool, right? We have these two receivers who are just setting records left and right, and it's just, the respect within the game and the respect for each other. So, yeah, Mike Evans, I mean, I don't know if you saw it or people saw it. There was about like an 8-minute video on YouTube of Mike Evans from once he set the record to kind of walking through all his teammates and then walking back to the locker room and the reception. You could just sort of see the pressure kind of come off of his shoulders and especially going through injury this season, missing a few games and getting that. I think Baker, we had the Bucs a couple weeks ago. I think Baker wanted it more for him than he did for himself, and so I talked to Jerry Rice about it yesterday, and strangely, they've never talked to each other. They don't know each other, but Jerry's like, when I played with Tim Brown with the Raiders, he's like, I envision that playing with Mike Evans would be similar, just in the work ethic, the way they go about it, the receivers that they are. And Jerry was saying, I would love to play alongside Mike Evans, and just that he has so much respect. And Jerry knows, he knows exactly what it takes to go in to get 11 1,000-yard receiving seasons. And, so it was interesting to get Jerry's perspective on it. He tweeted something out, just congratulating him. But I'll talk to Mike tomorrow. I actually fly down there tomorrow. We'll go to practice and then have our production meetings down there tomorrow and talk to Mike. I think the governor is declaring it Mike Evans Day tomorrow down there, cool. Some sort of special celebration. But But just really pretty cool. I asked Jerry how he'd feel if he breaks his record. He's like, I'm all for it. I mean, as we know, the saying goes, records are made to be broken, but just such a good respect level there.
For sure. And Jerry's got so many, he could give up one. He's got
exactly.
And he's so far ahead in some of them, it's kind of a joke. Melissa Stark's with us, sideline reporter for NBC. Of course, Sunday Night Football is where the Commanders will make their return to the playoffs for the first time since they played the Bucs back in the 2020-2021 season. Sunday night, 8 o'clock, NBC and Peacock. And Melissa, you did mention you had the Bucs a couple weeks ago. You also had the Commanders a couple weeks ago when they took on the Falcons. What do you remember, maybe being in the building on Friday when you guys have all those production meetings, and then, as you're thinking about those meetings on Saturday and preparing for the game on Sunday, like what's the thing that really stood out to you? And then when you're walking out of the stadium Sunday night after they've clinched and Jaden's pulled off what he's pulled off again, like what's the thing that kind of stuck with you about being around this team when you guys haven't really been around this team because they haven't been good enough to be on Sunday Night Football most of the last 5 years?
I think the first thing is, we're in the building. We kind of spend the day there. We go to practice. We have our meetings. We go down. We have lunch in the cafeteria, and we're with Dan Quinn, and he's telling us how much he wanted to bring back the history of the organization, right? And that they'd taken down. You spent time in there, like that they'd taken down all the old photos, right, as you're walking around, and just because of the name change and everything. And he's like, I put them all back up. There were so many major accomplishments in the history of this organization, and then to have a guy like Doug Williams, right? I talked to Doug before the game, and I think what struck me from everybody is how much everyone loves Jaden Daniels and his work ethic, from the offense to the defense to the coaches to whoever you talk to. And Doug Williams saying, I haven't felt this way in so long about this organization, and the energy around the team is off the charts, and everyone's buying in. And you say why, and they say he says number 5, right? And he's like, I call it the Jaden way, like just his work ethic, how he's the first. We've heard, that he changed the locks in college, right, so that he could get in early, and he's the first guy there and all of that. But, he walks the walk and talks the talk. Like he's got that. He instantly earned the respect of all these guys just because of the way he goes about it. And he doesn't feel like a rookie. He already treated, we've talked about how he treated college, like at the professional level, so that once he comes, it doesn't feel like a rookie season to Jaden Daniels. And we've seen it this season time and time again. In talking to Terry McLaurin earlier today, I said, what you've lived this. You've lived the change in the organization. What's the turnaround, the whole thing? And he's like, I think in the past that we would always find a way to lose, right? I mean, it's so true. When you think about it.
For sure.
And now he's like, and now we're finding ways to win. And we've seen it in all these close games. We saw it in our overtime game on Sunday Night Football, and the late game heroics, and that no moment is too big. And so I think that really bodes well for the playoffs. I'm so excited about this matchup. You never know who you're going to get. You find out kind of midway through our game, like halftime in our game last week of Sunday Night Football, where you're headed as a broadcast team. I'm so excited.
As someone who's not a night owl, Melissa, I cannot tell you how excited I was when I heard Mike go, and next, we'll tell you the playoff schedule in the middle of the first quarter. I was like, yes! I do not have to stay up till midnight to find this thing out. And I'm sure you were quite excited once you guys learned what you get. And the thing is, with the deal that NBC and y'all have with the NFL, you guys get some of the best games every single season, which is fantastic, and you guys do such a great job with them. So happy that that's the case. But you're around the Mahomeses, the Burrows, the Jacksons. Like you're around the best teams with the best quarterbacks, pretty much week in and week out. So. Yeah. Is the conversations that you've had this week and in the couple weeks ago about Jaden, are those very similar to those guys, or is it still different because he's a rookie and those guys have been around for a while?
No, and in fact, I'm happy you asked that, because we do one preseason game a year, and normally we do the Hall of Fame game. We couldn't do it this year because we were all at the Olympics. NBC was covering, early August. So we had the Commanders in the preseason. And we just all walked out of there kind of with our jaws dropped. I mean, from Chris Collinsworth to Mike to me, the producer, the director, everybody, of just how he did not seem like a rookie at all. And just the level of respect already then. And, and we so appreciated that he said, I'm glad I had to earn the job, right? I mean, who says that at that level? And just his mindset and his approach. So, I think it's awesome. I think it's so cool when you have these young guys who are the future and the future face of the NFL. And he's obviously such a dynamic, fun quarterback to watch. But like with the poise, and I actually did, one of the things the league has allowed us to do this year, is do the pre-kick interviews right before the game with a player. And so I did it with Jaden right before, and he was just relaxed and awesome and owned the moment. And Chris Collinsworth afterwards goes, "That was my favorite pre-kick interview that we've done all season." And so he's just so likable. And I think it just permeates throughout the building, and you understand that. And, the guys who have been around, the Mahomeses and the Josh Allens and all those guys, are obviously phenomenal to cover. But even like even a Baker Mayfield this week, he's so fun. He's never out of the game. He can always bring you back. And to see the way it's two totally different stories, obviously, but to see the way he's turned around his career and really found a home, and started a family and had a child and all this stuff, and is so grounded and feels so appreciated in Tampa. Every quarterback has their story, but it's a really fun one, I think, with both of them.
Last question for Melissa Stark here, of course, Sidelines NBC. She'll be there this weekend as the Commanders take on the Bucs in the wild card round of the NFL playoffs. And we talk so much, we spent so much of this interview, Melissa, talking about the composure and just the nature of Jaden Daniels. There's no bigger test of that composure than, all right, buddy, you're in the playoffs. Like the pressure is cranked all the way to 10. And you've covered so many playoff games over your career. I'm curious how you think the playoff experience that is plentiful in Tampa. This is a team that's won their division 4 straight years, and a lot of the same guys are around, versus Washington, where sure you have Ertz, sure you have Wagner. There's a couple other guys that have played in the playoffs, a couple guys that came over from Dallas, but a lot of guys that either haven't been here a while, and a bunch of coaches that, Cliff, Joe Witt, haven't been here in their current position. So how do you think that experience factor plays into the game this weekend when it comes to meeting the moment?
Right. I think a couple things. Number one, I'd start, with Dan Quinn and just the command and the of the organization and the leadership and the respect that he has, and he has been there. He's had some major ups and downs, right, in playoffs, as we well know. But I also would say, in talking to Terry McLaurin earlier today, what he said is a lot of the games that we've had this season, and it's what you and I talked about earlier in our conversation, the close games, the moments where you've had to rise to the occasion and stay even keel, and the fact that no moment is too big. I think that those have really helped this team, right? Because it's like, what's your heart rate? What's your pulse like, right? And we've seen them find ways to win those games as opposed to find ways to lose, as Terry said, that the organization has in the past. So, it's a new slate. I think it all starts anew. And I think the fact that, and as Terry said, like, we're finishers. That's what he's like, I feel like we've got to start faster. That's the key. I mean, it's great to be a finisher, right?
Right.
Because that really bodes well, because it's you can start fast, sure, but it's how you finish. So I think that's really cool, and I'm actually glad that he, highlighted that, and we chatted about that, because it, if for whatever Washington fans are listening, I think it should give you confidence and bodes well for the team in terms of their mentality going in.
For sure. And Dan had a great quote earlier this week. He's like, I love that we can do this, but I try to tell the guys we don't have to. They're 8-4 in close games this year. For whatever it's worth, the Bucs only 3-5 as close games defined by NFL Pro and Next Gen Stats. So if it's close, which playoff games often are, it seems like the advantage will be with Washington, but we'll see on Sunday. Melissa, Mike, Chris will be there. You can watch the game on NBC4 here locally in D.C., of course, on Peacock as well. Melissa, this was so great to chat. Really appreciate it. Safe travels, and look forward to watching you and the crew this weekend.
Thanks so much. Great to talk to you. I appreciate it.
That's Melissa Stark, everybody. Sidelines for NBC Sports with us here on the Hoffman Show. Again, 8 o'clock, their coverage starts. But let's be real. You're just going to flip over after you watch the Packers-Eagles game, which is after you watch the 1 o'clock game, which your TV is just going to be probably on. You're not going to move from your couch after watching the games on Saturday. It's what we're all doing this weekend. It's going to be glorious. When we get back, let's actually dive into that last discussion point that I just had with Melissa on close games and the playoff pressure. Are we nervous at all about all these players that haven't been there before for the Commanders? We'll talk about it next on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. I love the question on Around the Horn right now. After losing 17 of the last 24, should Phoenix Suns blow it up? I didn't realize. I knew things were bad. I know Beal had gotten benched. I didn't realize it was that bad.
17 of 24. Oh my gosh.
Oh, the
That's
Wizards.
territory.
Yeah, so the Wizards are almost that bad.
I know.
Are almost that good in their last 24.
You know who's been really good, quiet as kept, Craig?
Who's that?
The Detroit Pistons. They've won 8 of 9, and I think they've won 5 straight, actually. And they are finally above 500.
Love that
for the
for
first
them.
time since 2019.
I was about to say, since when?
Since 2019.
2019? That can't
a long
be
time.
real. They didn't go like 2-1 to start a season or something?
I guess not.
Holy hell.
Yeah,
The Wizards have been to the playoffs since 2019. Russ?
No.
Didn't they make the play-in?
Yeah, it's been some time.
Okay, maybe not the playoffs. They made the play-in.
Not the what? I'm talking about the Pistons.
No, I know. Since 2019, the Wizards have made the playoffs. That's how long it's been since the Pistons have been above 500. This is why we talk about football. What do you make of the experience factor? Because I could see where it could matter for Washington, where some guys start to press and try to make plays. I don't think it'll matter at quarterback. I trust Jaden in a big spot to keep it in. I trust that Terry is a big game player. And actually, I think with Terry and Jaden specifically, those are big-time players that elevate to big-time moments. When the spotlight has been the brightest this year, who has made the key plays for Washington? It is Jaden, and it has often been to Terry. Or even last week against Dallas, Terry goes up and gets the game winner. So I trust that in big moments, those two specifically will rise. I tend to think a guy like Frankie will rise, but I could also see a guy like Frankie or on down the roster, like your Alameda Zacchaeus, your De'Ami Browns, etc., trying to do a little bit too much and trying to make plays. And sometimes that happens in playoff games. Now, you could say the same thing for Bucky Irving, who's a rookie on the Tampa side of it, Jalen McMillan, who's a rookie on the Tampa side of it. But I do think the fact that the core of Tampa's roster, even guys on their offensive line that are second-year players, like they won a playoff game against Philly last year and played in Detroit and actually played Detroit pretty tough. So I think that is something that hasn't been talked about a ton from the Washington side this week. And why would we? Because it's not an advantage for Washington. But in order to try to paint the whole picture, like it's worth mentioning that the Bucs do have a pretty significant advantage in terms of playoff experience. And I haven't done like the games played thing, but I'm sure if you took off the top 2 of each roster, the Bucs would lose Mike Evans and someone else. The Commanders would lose Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz probably, and like take the next 51 guys, and I don't know that it's even remotely close.
Yeah, I mean, I think they still do have a couple of guys from their Super Bowl, championship
They definitely do.
team. So that does play a factor, but I feel as though the pressing and, the moment getting a little too big would primarily come from somebody that's a rookie quarterback or, I don't know. I just feel like Jaden, he just so different because we've never seen him like fluster. We've never seen the moment be too big for him. And I think that's typically when we would see a guy press like at the quarterback position. As far as like cornerback goes, Mikey, maybe, but I feel as though he's not even going to be tasked with, defending the Mike Evans. Like the spotlight isn't necessarily going to be on him.
I mean, we hope not, but like eventually there'll be some call where he does.
Yeah.
And, St. Juice, we know if he's out there, and hopefully he's not because Lattimore's playing and it's fine. Like moments have gotten to him. But there has been times where like Mikey this year, I mean, that's a good one. Like Mikey at times has like lost his mind and you're like, what are you doing, bro? But also he has made some of the most key plays of the year where he's turned games with super physical play. And I can't stress how important he is this week in terms of the screen game because Tampa is the best team in the league on screens. Again, Baker leads the NFL in yardage on passes thrown behind the line of scrimmage. So Mikey coming up in support, Chin, Quan, obviously Lattimore, Frankie and Bobby, these D linemen getting out in space. Like Dorrance Armstrong's been a monster. Like he'll go slam down a screen for a -2. Like these guys have to make these plays this weekend because they're going to set them up. And they're really good at executing them. So it's the mental mistakes everywhere. And then I think the other interesting one to me is the coordinators. And this goes on for everybody but Bowles, who calls the defense for Tampa, if I'm remembering correctly. But like Liam Cohen, this is his first year as a play caller. This is his first playoff game. Cliff, I believe they went to the playoffs once when he was in Arizona. It did not go particularly well because it was a late season and nothing in Arizona went well for them late in the season. But he has not been in a playoff game in a long time, even if he was one then. So what is his game plan? I have a lot of faith in Cliff because he is ultra creative and ultra competitive every single week. What's he going to do? Throw more trick plays in, something that's out of the norm? And it also comes down to Dan. Like Dan's going to be like, hey, play our game. Don't do anything crazy. And so I think for Joe Witt, too, anything that feels like it's a little out of character, I think is going to have more to do with Lattimore being out there than it is, oh my God, it's the playoffs. Let's play a bunch of man coverage and blitz like crazy. It's like, no, that's what they did against Philadelphia because they had Lattimore. And so I don't know that that's going to be any different. Yeah. By the way, I don't think Liam Cohen's going to lose his mind. That dude's awesome. But you don't know. It's the playoffs. That's the fun of it.
Yeah, but that's also the thing I like about Dan. Like, I think he's done a great job of just calming the guys all season long. So I think for guys like Jeremy Chin, Frankie Louisville, who's, also going to be playing in their first playoff games, I think it's going to be chill just because of the message that Dan Quinn has, spread through that locker room about being calm, being ready for the moment, being where your feet are.
100%. Guys like Allen and Payne, I think that they're interesting to watch this weekend as well. So it's going to be fun to see who shows up, who shows out Sunday night in Tampa. We'll get back to what Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt had to say themselves today ahead of their playoff game coming up in our Pick 6 at 6. But next, it is time for Never Read the Comments. We're all over the place on this week. Some really, really fun comments that we'll lock into next on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube too at the Team 980. And, the Team 980 is, or at the Team 980 is where you can go to watch the show, not only live, but on demand. And then when you watch it either place, you can leave comments on it. And then we also have plenty of comments that we look at over at the Craig Hoffman YouTube page. Where we also just reached 10,000 subscribers, which all becomes relevant information. I'm just telling you this for fun. It's because that all winds up in this segment.
We tried to warn them. They didn't listen. Yeah! Every week, the Hoffman Show goes into the belly of the beast.
We read those comments, baby.
Never read the comments.
All right, let's dive into it. Never read the comments style, except for we do actually read the comments, and we've put a lot of time and effort into this whole YouTube thing, Anthony, to the point that on the @CraigHoffman YouTube page, just before the new year, we reached 10,000 subscribers. Hey!
I wish I had my
Your air horn?
my drop of the applause.
Oh. Applause, air horns. Would have taken anything. Instead,
I know,
I think I get a tepid applause from Anthony. There we go. An aggressive applause from Anthony. Made a little thank you video, and Anthony, you were thanked in it. Obviously, is a enormous contributor to the show. Some would say the most key outside of me, because we've talked about it. Anthony couldn't host the show. He doesn't want to host the show. He doesn't. No, he's fine in the role that he's in. So I wish people that aren't watching right now could see the grin on your face. Yeah, nope, that is 100% correct.
Yes.
So made a little thank you video, which actually led to some really heartwarming stuff, Anthony. I got this from Dave. Dave in DC 9221 says, "You're on a positive way to your goals. The Commanders making the playoffs and/or showing a positive product will really help." I agree. I did thank Jaden Daniels, Adam Peters, and Dan Quinn in the video, Anthony.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know where my bread's buttered. I'm still objective, but I know what's good for me.
Yeah.
Your insight, even though I do not always agree, is really meaningful, especially when you talk about play evaluation explanation. Why players struggle rather than saying they are no good is refreshing. Best of luck. Thanks, Dave. That comment actually meant a lot. Hey, I don't always agree with you, but I appreciate the way you go about your business. So I appreciate that. Oh, God, I didn't copy and paste the username on this next comment, and it was really touching. So I have to look this up for a second, Anthony. Bear with me, Anthony. Bear with me, audience, for one moment as I try to figure out where this comment came from and try to do it as efficiently as possible, something that I am failing at miserably. If I click on that and then I click on the comments section and I click on that filter, then I can say this comment is from Isaac Montoya. And people, you'll understand, I promise in a second, why I wanted to make sure I gave Isaac credit for this. Isaac Montoya, and he's got a bunch of letters and stuff, but Isaac writes, "Craig, this past semester I went through EMT school, which was long hours on top of work, and one of the things I most look forward to was listening to your videos on the hour-long drive home. Not only did it keep me sane fighting San Antonio traffic, it was also a robust escape from drowning in so much anatomy and physiology. Thanks for making quality content and putting it on YouTube for Commanders fans like me who don't live in the DMV and can't make the live stream. Please keep it up. They should have put your name somewhere on my EMT certification as credit for helping me get through school." That's cool as hell, Anthony.
That's super cool.
Isaac, salute. Thank you. I think I wrote this back in a comment, but I'm going to say this on here too. Isaac, thank you for dedicating your career, your vocation to serving others. An EMT is obviously such a tremendously important job, and there's a lot of stuff you have to deal with as an EMT. And so salute to you for choosing that as a valiant career path while goofballs like me talk about sports. And it's one of the things that in a moment of sincerity here, there are times when this job feels wholly unfulfilling because there's so much real stuff that's happening in the world. And there are times that I've talked to people who do stuff like Isaac in the real world that I feel like is a much bigger contribution to society than talking about sports. And often they will say, like, I need people like you or the actors that make films or musicians that make music creators, entertainers to help me get through my day to do my job. And that makes me feel a little bit better about doing this. And I realize that is on some level self-serving so that I feel better about myself. But I do hope that we're doing this for more than just the paycheck, that there is the connection we have with the audience. And it's very cool when you guys share stories like that. So Isaac, again, salute. I'm sorry you live in a place with terrible traffic. At least you have tremendous tacos and other great Mexican food down there in San Antonio. And the Riverwalk. And you can make fun of Charles Barkley.
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Charles Barkley, San Antonio, long history of battle. So in that video, Anthony, last thing on the thank you video, real quick before we dive into the Commanders and Cliff Kingsbury, stay or go, and some of the other things that we talked about this past week and people left comments on. In the video, Anthony, there was some of the footage of you in the rooster sweater and the glasses and the hat, because of course there was. And Steve Moody says, after the little tease, I want a full video of Anthony lip syncing the Humpty Dance. Yes, I'm old as hell.
I like that song too, though. But I don't know if I can fulfill that promise.
I mean, that would be a pretty funny, because Anthony, the Wheel of Mediocre Punishment was for the regular season.
It was.
And we did say that whoever lost like the full season's worth was going to have to do something more severe.
Really?
I do think that was the case.
Did we
Now,
really talk? Or are you making this up?
No, I think that's real. If you sweep the playoffs, I do think there's a chance I could still lose. But what if it was you that we filmed a music video of you in the rooster sweater with the fedora and the glasses on, a full Anthony Haney Humpty Dance music video?
One, I would really get into it.
You probably would. It actually would be really funny.
That's
it actually
just who I
wouldn't be
am.
very much punishment. It would be more punishment for me to edit the thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think I would thoroughly enjoy it. Is that really a punishment at that?
No,
at that point,
it's not. But it is a great idea for content.
If you lose,
if I had to do it, that would be punishment. I would be mortified. I would just have to get into it so I could survive the thing.
Yeah,
embracement for survival. All right, let's get into some Commanders shenanigans, shall we? And again, thank you everybody for the kind words. Thank you for subscribing. 10K. The goal, by the way, Anthony, for 2025. Double it. It's taken us 2 years to get to 10K. I want to get to 20K in 1 year. We got to get 20. We got to get 28 new subscribers a day on average.
That's good math. Or did you calculate that?
I did that.
Oh,
yeah,
I was about to say.
You think I did that off the top of the dome right now? Get the hell out of here. Do you know me? Come on. All right. Two enormous topics for the week. One, talking about Jaden Daniels and the decision to remove him from the Dallas game is how I'm going to say that. Not bench him. Remove him from the Dallas game. But first, on Cliff Kingsbury and whether or not he would stay or go when he gets job offers, which inevitably he'll at least get interview requests. He's already got a couple for the head coach openings around the NFL. Brian Mulholland, or actually, first before Brian had a big long comment that I want to read. But you had people both ways saying, for instance, Sai Buddy 4603, Cliff is staying one more year at least. Leaving Washington, a 12-win team, would be taking 5 steps back to get a bad ball club off the ground, go and try to win a Super Bowl, and then go coach, as in head coach. Then you have people like Butler32X who says he better take any job that he can. I am of the thought that none of the current jobs available are actually that appealing. I will say the Raiders firing Tom Telesco today as their general manager to match Antonio Pierce getting fired yesterday makes the Vegas job jump up my rankings because it is the only non-Jets job that has a GM opening as well as a coach opening. So if you are, for instance, trying to move to the front of the Ben Johnson coach hierarchy of where he might want to finally leave if he leaves Detroit, he probably wants to take Commanders assistant GM Lance Newmark with him to be the general manager. That's been rumored around the league, but let's say it's not Newmark, it's someone else, whoever that person is. And if you're a coach somewhere else, maybe you want to take someone with you that's a general manager to make sure that you're on the same page. Vegas is the only place that has that. And you have an owner with resources and that will spend. And, they talked to Cliff about the OC job last year. I don't know that Cliff is going to want to go back to Vegas on that front, but who knows? We'll see. Brian Mulholland, 2467, says, though, here's the problem with being picky about your head coach opportunities. The quote-unquote good jobs, however you define them, don't open up very often. People like Andy Reid and John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin tend to sit on them for a decade plus. And the lesson of Bobby Slowick shows how quickly you can go from having the cachet to pick your destination to having no one return your phone calls overnight. I would also be skeptical of the opportunities that are out there right now, but how do you know the next year's won't be worse? I hope Cliff stays. He really won me over after being a Cliff skeptic when he was hired. But if your objective is to be a successful head coach, I feel you have to go out and interview, and you have to do so seriously with the intention of taking the job if it's quote-unquote good enough. Maybe none are good enough, but that's a dangerous game. I think this is a fine take from Brian, Anthony. I think in order to get a job, you first got to realize, like, okay, what's the job? And to find that out, you have to interview. But I also think part of it is I don't need to interview with the Jets. There's nothing Woody Johnson can tell me that would make me not believe all the things that I know to be true about Woody Johnson. It's like when Ron Rivera took the Commanders job and Dan Snyder was the owner. And he's like, oh, I can, Dan's giving me all this power. I'll be able to run the ship. No, you're still working for Dan Snyder, the same buffoon who's been running the team for 25 years straight into the ground. And guess what? He continued to run it into the ground, and now Ron Rivera likes to run around being like, if Dan hadn't been the owner, and it's like, you took the job. And I think that one of the biggest factors for a head coach's success is you have to be great at hiring other people. And in some ways, that includes hiring your boss, quote unquote. You have to understand who you're working for and if you can work for them. And I could see going to Vegas, talking to Mark Davis and being like, I can work with this guy. Now, I'd have a lot of questions about how many coaches he's fired after 1 year and some of the upheaval in that organization. But I could see that being the case. After listening to Shad Khan talk in Jacksonville, I wouldn't want to work for that guy. I don't think he understands how the league works. And so it really comes down to, do you want to get paid or do you want to be successful? And again, do you have to, yes, the Pittsburghs, they don't come open very often. They've had 3 coaches since the 1960s. Baltimore, don't come open very often. Harbaugh's been there for, I think it's 17 years. But I do think you have to look at certain jobs that may not be as appealing on paper because the roster, for instance, is bad, and go, that's temporary. We can change that. What you can't change is ownership and how the structure is within an organization. And if you are Cliff Kingsbury and you have an idea of that you want to lay down the structure of the organization your way, you either need to find somewhere where it's actually laid down your way already and the people there you can work with, or you have to find somewhere that's willing to give you a blank canvas and a long runway to actually build. And I don't know that any of the jobs on this market are going to do that. And if that means you're here for 2 or 3 more years, fine. He's getting paid head coach money until 2027 from Arizona. So I don't see the appeal of going and failing again, because that's the last thing I'll say, Anthony, about Cliff, is he's not a first-time guy. He's not someone that if he fails, people are going to be like, oh, he got bad ownership in Arizona and bad ownership in New York. They're going to be like, he's a 2-time failed head coach. We're not hiring him again. This is his last shot.
Yeah, I mean, so, and I think you've, stressed this the last couple of days. Like, money isn't an incentive for Cliff right now when it comes to the head coach openings. Like, it's not. It's more so, from what I'm gathering anymore, ownership, the roster, and I'm not even sure, like, which one or, like, which
I would think
hierarchy.
ownership is more important.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, working with Caleb is appealing. Working with Trevor Lawrence to an extent is appealing. Working with Drake May is appealing. It's certainly more appealing than, oh, man, I got Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler. Like, if you go to New Orleans, you better know, like, it's probably going to be a couple years. But, like, look at how fast they flip the roster. And if I'm Cliff, like, I'm thinking about that. I'm like, man, I know that so much of the success is driven by 5. And they had the number 2 pick in the draft, and they got it right, and they saw how fast they could flip. But I'm also like, hey, not many people here that were here last year. And a roster, too. This is something I was listening to the Athletic Football Show, which I feel like I listen to all the time and then wind up talking about on the show. But, like, Mike Sando was on. I think Mike's really smart. But Mike talked about, like, some of the coaches, like, looking at the rosters, and he's like, you better build an O-line. And I'm like, that is, I don't want to say it's overrated, but I think we learned the lesson this year in Washington. that who you are as a coordinator can change who your offensive line is. Yeah, the trenches are super important. Coaching them well can turn a mediocre roster into something you can win with. Of course, it's better that you would, over time, try to build something like Detroit and Philadelphia have, where they have the best offensive lines in football. But those lines are also coached well. I guarantee you, Eric Bieniemy could turn Detroit's offensive line into not as good of an offensive line as Ben Johnson has had it operating at the past couple of years. Like, it's mostly the same dudes here. Well, I guess not mostly the same dudes, but like mostly the same level dudes here. Like, I don't think people are looking at Nick Allegretti and like, wow, what an upgrade they got at left guard this year in Washington. People thought this was going to be the worst line in the league. They underrated how good Biotish was. But Andrew Wiley's still at right tackle. They have a rookie starting at left tackle. And they're way better because the way Cliff deploys them is intelligent. And the quarterback also elevates the offensive line. And so when you look at these rosters, I think, one, if you're someone like Cliff, who is a scheme guy, who is a schematics guy, you go, I can work with that in a way that the last coach couldn't. And two, you know how fast you can flip a roster. You want 30 new guys, and maybe not New Orleans because they're in Cap Hill. So it might be a 2-year project there. But do you have good ownership? Do you have, if there's a GM in place, can you work with him? Because like Mickey Loomis, for instance, in New Orleans is an executive type. He's not actually a super scout. So if you want to bring in an assistant GM with you that he's willing to work with, and like that guy's kind of running your football department, that could be an appealing spot. You're just going to have to deal with a really crummy roster and a bad cap situation for 2 years. But I'd rather deal with that than knowing that my owner is going to meddle in everything we do, like the Jets, any day of the week. Any day of the week. Because also the good ownership in a place like New Orleans will give you a longer runway. So if you're trying to find a place that's both, yeah, you're probably going to have to try to see if John Harbaugh wants to retire. But I do think that the ownership thing is the one that, like, that's just an absolute no-go for me. The other big topic of the week in the comments, Anthony, was about, obviously we talked a lot about on Monday, about how Jaden Daniels getting taken out of the Cowboys game was, I think, a fine move, but one that did not make a whole lot of sense as explained. I thought Michael Phillips put it absolutely perfectly when he joined us very briefly on Monday, when he was like, we know that you're not going to bench your quarterback for performance like you said you were doing here because you didn't when his rib was hurting for 3 straight weeks. Like, we all saw that. What are you talking about? And so I thought the couple comments that were really good on that front. Double Raven, 00. So it spelled out double Raven and then 00, Anthony. But in my mind, that's double Raven, 00.
So is the word double or is it Raven?
No, it's the word double, the word Raven, and then 2 zeros.
Okay.
But I think you say that out loud, double Raven, 00.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Says Quinn simply does not want to imply or admit that he was willing to lose the game to protect his quarterback. He doesn't want to hear that accusation. I think that's probably correct. I also think that's very silly because that's a perfectly fine thing to say in Week 18 when you've already clinched a playoff spot, which was my whole point. CE Jink 140. That's probably not how that's supposed to be pronounced. I like double Raven 00 better. All due respect to Segink 140. Who knows, but I took it as we are going to do what's best for the team, and it was a physical game. 5 was getting sacked, banged up. 5 probably did have some soreness, and if they needed to win to make the playoffs, he probably would have stayed in. But it was more important to make sure he didn't get overly banged up or injured when their playoff spot was already locked. And further, Dallas was successfully mixing up the defense, resulting in 5 not having the best game. So don't let this game damage his confidence or his body, and see if Marcus can provide a spark. Just my 2 cents. Again, I don't really have a problem with that calculation. That's just not what Dan said, except for the spark part. He's like, well, if it was week 12 in the middle of the season, I would have made the same decision. And again, I have no problem with the decision because it would be silly not to factor in where you already are in the season and kind of the status of your quarterback and the way the game is going. He wasn't, there was something that was a little bit off. And if that was being caused by leg soreness, fine. And if that's enough that Dan would have actually benched him in week 12, fine. I just find that hard to believe because you want to let your quarterback, especially a young quarterback who you want to learn these lessons over time, You want to give him time to work through stuff. Also, Jaden said flat out in the postgame that had this not been Week 18, they would have had to drag him off the field. So I don't believe that for a second. Which again, none of my issue was that it was the wrong move. It was just, don't lie to me. What's the saying, Anthony? Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining.
Yep.
Felt like my leg was getting peed on a little bit.
Yeah.
I did love this comment from James. James Hill 2518 says, DQ removing JD was a perfect move. Jaden is a humble student of the game. Trust and believe he learned from Mariota. I believe it will be a positive energy moving forward. I do love the point of, like, given that it was Week 18, Jaden was like, hell yeah, let's let Marcus get some snaps. And he was the happiest person on the field when they went out and did what they did. Jaden's humility here, and Dan, by the way, knowing that Jaden wouldn't be a problem with this in the press, no leaking to reporters of this or whatever, like, that speaks very well of Jaden, and it's part of what makes Jaden special. All right, last couple fun ones to end here, and then you'll hear from Cliff, and you'll hear from Joe Witt Jr. coming up in the Pick 6 at 6. On the Benjamin St. Juice of it all, Gary Myers 7467 says, I've been saying he is bad from day one, and he has lost a lot of games for us. Anthony, who's been the starting cornerback for most of December?
Corner?
For the Commanders? Yeah, corner.
We've had Mikey.
Yep. And who's on the other one?
BSJ and
Davis started once.
Yeah.
Lattimore had the game. I think Philly was like the first week.
Game and a half.
Yeah.
For
but
Lattimore.
how many games did they lose in December?
They didn't lose any.
Yeah. How many games did they win all year?
12.
How many games of those did BSJ start? Like 9 of them, probably?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. You can't, again, you don't have to overstate stuff to make your point. Yes, he has been bad a lot this year. There are certainly a lot of plays you can point to and be like, that's not good. He has lost us a lot of games. No, he hasn't, because they haven't lost a lot of games. Last but not least, during the postgame show, Anthony, called Marcus Mariota old because I said he had old man strength. And people were really upset about that. Although some were more jovial about it, including Oathmain. I don't know how to say this. You know who you are. Calling Mariota old is crazy. He's only 31. Look, I'm 34. In about 6 weeks, I'll turn 35. I'm a young man. Stop laughing, you jerk. I'm a young man, but 31 in the NFL is old. It's NFL old. He's a young man in real life, but he's NFL old. That's all I meant. I say that with respect. He's got the beautiful salt and pepper going. But he did old man strength a dude. And there's nothing wrong with that. All right. That's never read the comments, everybody. You can leave your comments on YouTube at Craig Hoffman, at the Team 980. We read them. We pick out their favorite ones to respond to. Some are fun. Some are nonsensical. Some are interesting. If your comments are any of those things, maybe you'll hear them on this segment. And that'll be next Wednesday at 5:30, because that's when we do this live here on the radio. When we get back here on the Team 980, live on the radio, Pick 6 at 6. Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt Jr. You're here from both coordinators ahead of the weekend's wild card showdown against Tampa. Next. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. We are about 6:05 here on a Thursday, which means it's time for a Pick Six.
The 6 biggest Commander storylines.
It is caught!
Delivered at 6 o'clock sharp. It's the Pick Six at 6.
We set out to find a leader, someone who could take this franchise to the next level, build an elite team that consistently competes for championships.
Let's get rolling with Cliff Kingsbury on a Thursday.
Number 1.
Biggest lesson for Cliff coming out of the Week 1 loss against Tampa was what? And now, obviously, you've never learn it, apply it over the course of an entire regular season. And here we are facing the same team again going into Wild Card Weekend.
Doing a bunch of substituting and really slowing the game down, thinking that would help him, and I think it hurt us as a unit. You know, we play better with more rhythm and pace, and him getting on the ball and being able to have more time on the play clock to analyze and see what the defense is doing. And we really subbed a bunch. We played in some sets that were not as probably dynamic or having our best 4 or 5 skill players on the field at the same time. And I thought the coaching staff did a nice job of recognizing that and adjusting that moving forward.
It's really interesting to go back and watch Week 1 and seeing some of the personnel groupings and some of the things they tried to do. And now hearing some of the reasoning behind it from Cliff makes a lot of sense, and also why they got away from it. One of the things that they also didn't do a good job of in Week 1 was getting Terry McLaurin the ball. Now, that does not mean there weren't opportunities. There were certainly some shots called and some things that I think a Jaden Daniels of Week 4 or 5, even Week 3 against Cincinnati, obviously found Terry a couple times deep there, would have made. Just Week 1, Week 2, Jaden hadn't quite figured out some of the NFL windows, some of the NFL timing, what NFL Open is quite yet, but he learned tremendously fast. But what does Cliff attribute the lack of production in Week 1 from Terry against this same Tampa team?
Yeah, I think we definitely did not have a good enough plan to get him the ball. And then Todd Bowles is a good defensive coach. So I don't, having watched the game, it's hard to even watch because it's so different than what we are now. But he recognizes that's one of the best players in the league, and so he's going to do everything to take him away. And then I do a better job calling plays, and I think Jaden has evolved to a point now where when we have an opportunity to get Terry the ball, he's going to take advantage of it.
I think that's 100% correct. I think Bowles might have even had a better understanding of how good McLaurin is at that point than Quinn and Cliff was, because I think, again, Terry's ability as a contested catch player is so special that unless you just give him the opportunities, it's easy on tape to be like, he's not open. It's like, no. For him, that's open. Give him the ball. And not only might he catch it, he might catch it and break a tackle and run for an extra 20 yards. So I think that is the thing that Jaden and Cliff and everybody around the staff has learned. And in Week 1, they did give him some deep shots, some opportunities. And again, there was some stuff that was open, but they didn't force feed it. They didn't say, hey, we're going to get him a slant, a screen, a hitch. Like, when we're going a quick game, like, let's make sure we look at Terry, because getting him involved just means other things start to happen. And Jamel Dean's a very good corner. He had a very successful day, allowed no catches to McLaurin in Week 1. I would imagine he also wasn't targeted very much. I'd imagine if you're Jamel Dean, you could play similar coverage on Sunday, and you won't have as quiet of a day. You're going to have some work to do against 17. Now, also, another way that they prevent 17 from getting involved is this defense is mega aggressive for Todd Bowles. In fact, since Week 11, no team has blitzed more. Week 11, by the way, the Tampa bye week. So since Tampa did the self-scout and all the things you do want to buy and comes back, in that stretch, no team has blitzed more in the NFL than the Tampa Bay Bucs. They are blitzing on 48% of pass snaps, almost 1 of every 2. They actually blitzed Jaden, one of their highest percentages of the season pre that Week 11 bye at 47% in Week 1, something that Cliff dealt with then and we'll have to deal with now.
Yeah, I think he's great at the pressures, knowing when to dial him up and call him. It's not just third down. Like, he has a great feel for your tendencies, what you've done throughout the season, and when to bring those pressures. And so I have to be great on my sequencing and play calling, and then just give Jaden answers for those pressures. Like, we got to be able to get the ball out of our hand. We can't take those first and second down sacks. And that's the biggest deal to me is making sure he has an outlet on every play, that they're going to be in the pressure. Hey, let's get a completion, try to make a guy miss in space, and we'll play the next play. But if you don't have answers, he'll make it a long day for you.
Sure will, sure did in week 1.
Number 2.
But this isn't week 1 anymore. Jaden's answer in week 1 was simply to just run. And he did. He was pretty effective as a scrambler, but that is very different than making quick decisions and kind of getting Tampa out of some of these blitz looks, knowing that that's what they want to do. So what has been the biggest area of growth for Jaden Daniels since week 1? Here's Cliff Kingsbury once again.
Everything, really. I think just understanding the system. The first game, we didn't know what we were or who we were, what he was. And so even me calling plays and understanding how to put him in better situations to be successful, and all the skill guys. How do we use this guy? So we've evolved a bunch, but I think you just watch his game and the way he played that first game. I mean, the very first pass he threw for like -20, like a backwards pass. And he's just come a long way. So it's a lot of hard work, a lot of mental reps. And so I'm anxious to see the second time around, how far we've come as an entire unit.
I'm totally right there with Cliff as an observer. Obviously, he's a participant, but it's interesting to hear him say, like, we truly did not know who we were. They have a keen sense of that now. I do think it's been a little bit squirrely as of late, as their rushing attack has not been good, but they have found ways around it, whether that's the quick passing game, whether that's the quarterback run game. That is something that they have been more comfortable putting a lot of things in Jaden's hands. And Cliff was actually asked, like, what % of the time does Jaden make the right decision? And again, that could be simply handing the ball off on an RPO, but how often does he make the right football play?
That's a great question. A high percentage, I would say. Like the one thing that's shown up, I think, the last few, I would say probably the last month, when we've had to put the ball in his hands more because the run game hasn't been there. We played good teams that are good against the run, but I'd say just the negative plays, like the first, second down sacks, the sack number in general has gone up, and some of that's he's trying to take over and make the play. But I think for the most part, if you put those out, like he's going to the right place for the ball the majority of the time.
He definitely is. Even last week, like the throws weren't on target to the level that we're used to with him, but he was making good decisions by and large. And I do think that when they've really preached something to him, he has shown an adaptability and dexterity to learn. And so I do wonder if we see some more throwaways, if we see some stuff this week that's a little bit different in the sack department, because that has clearly been a point of emphasis from Dan Quinn and from Cliff Kingsbury the last couple of weeks.
Number 3.
Last but not least, Cliff did make the playoffs as a head coach in Arizona. This is his first trip back, though, in a long, long time. What's this opportunity mean to the Commanders' offensive coordinator?
It is. It's very exciting. It's hard to get here. I think that's what these young players need to understand, is that there's a lot of veterans that have played 10, 12 years. It's like the second time they've even got in. And we got in the 1 year in Arizona, and it was not a great game, but it was a lot of work to get there. And so I think just being in the moment, understanding how fortunate we are to be in this position, and we won the last 4 games on the last play, and it can go like that in this league. So we got to make sure we appreciate and take advantage of the opportunity.
The other thing about the playoffs, not just how hard it is to get back, that I don't know that unless you're in it every day, you really appreciate and understand. And I say this as someone who's on a beat, not on a team, right? I was in the locker room every day for the better part of 5 years covering a team, and I only covered one playoff season in 2015. And the thing is, but I did cover, like, from the studio side of it. In Dallas, I covered a couple of playoff teams. But every playoff team I've ever covered, especially in the NFL, is how quickly it ends. And it's something that we're not really thinking about right now. And hopefully we're not thinking about it for a couple of weeks. Who knows? Maybe we'll know when it ends, because they go on a run and they're in the Super Bowl. And it's like, oh, we got one more. But when you think that you can win, which all these guys do, and then suddenly it's over, and the next day is a locker clean out, the just suddenness of that is something that is hard to describe. And I distinctly remember experiencing that as a reporter in 2015, going from, hey, they're going to beat Green Bay. I like the way this matchup is shaping up for Washington, and thinking about what the next game would be and all that, to, wait, what? We have to be in Ashburn at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and a bunch of dudes are going to be putting all their stuff in trash bags? The hell? So I think that would be if I'm Bobby Wagner, if I'm a Dan Quinn, if I'm getting up in front of the team this week at all, I'd be like, not only should you appreciate this moment because of how hard it is to get here. And you can talk, have guys that have been those 10-year players talk about how this might even be their first playoff game. But a guy like Bobby, who's both won and lost, can talk about how abrupt the ending is if you lose and how terrible that feeling is. And that's something you just don't want on Sunday. Joe Witt's had that feeling. He's also had lots of playoff winning in his career as an assistant coach. This will be his first game as a defensive coordinator. You'll hear from Joe next on the back half of our Pick 6 on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. And we're in the midst of our Pick 6 at 6, where you get the biggest storylines, the most important sound bites of the day, which on a Thursday come from the Commanders coordinators. And it's time to pick things up with number 4 and Joe Witt Jr. I heard from Cliff Kingsbury off the top of the hour. If you missed it, rewind or check the podcast, both available in the Odyssey app.
Number 4.
Let's get started with Joe Witt Jr. and same place we started with Cliff. How have things changed for your defense since week 1 until now? There's personnel changes, there's schematic changes, whole lot of change since week 1 for Joe Witt's side.
Well, if you look at the first 3 games, all right, we were 31st in pass defense. All right, we finished 3rd. Okay, we were probably 31st in percentage. We finished 3rd. 3rd down, we've been up and down. Right before this last game, we were teetering in the top 10. We were horrible then, so the defense has really trended in the right direction. So the points have been down. So the defense is just different.
He doesn't want to give a lot of detail. And he probably also doesn't want to say bad things about some of the guys that were playing, but yeah, you could say it's different. So what's the defense at least doing well at this point of the season?
Well, the times that we've gone out there, so we dropped the punt in the last game. We went out there and held them to a field goal. The way we played in the red zone this last game, the sudden change, situational football, we're playing much better. Okay, the thing that we have to do is get the ball. We have to do that. That's what. And I know everybody wants to talk about the run game, but if we can get the ball and get some of those turnovers, that controls a lot of the game as well. But the way we run and hit and the violence and the connection that we play with, really pleased with that.
So much better than week 1, where they were still having all kinds of issues. And oh my God, it's a bunch. Let's all run into each other and not cover anybody. No, they're not doing that stuff anymore. It's much better. They've got better communicators out there. And obviously, as we'll talk about in just a second, they could have a much, much better one this weekend with Marshawn Lattimore making his return to the lineup. But the passing game is just part of what you have to deal with when it comes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Number 5.
The running game, not only is Bucky Irving a 1,000-yard rusher, again, more on him in a moment, but this has been the best rushing season of Baker Mayfield's career. He's actually the 7th leading rusher amongst quarterbacks in the NFL on scrambles this season. What's that all about, Joe Witt?
I think he is just doing a good job of making people miss. I mean, he's been hard to tackle in the pocket across every team that goes in there. So you have to hit him as if you're going to hit a running back. If you go in there like you're going to hit a quarterback, normal quarterbacks, you're going to probably come off. So
simple as that. You can't give that dude space. He's slippery. And the thing is about him, he's slippery not only in space, he's slippery in the pocket as well, which is why he's hard to sack. And they really struggle with that in week 1. Now, of course, the most dangerous running threat is Bucky Irving, the rookie running back who went over 1,000 yards for Tampa this season. What's the key to stopping him?
Well, the key is to handling the screen game, because that's how they like to use them a lot. And then in the run game, making sure that we take care of the C gap in the run game.
So the C gap is more outside, and there are plays he had an 18-yarder against the Chargers where it's a trap. So on trap, you basically let one of the defensive tackles come up the field, and then you have, or actually I guess technically it was a wham because it was a tight end who did this, not an offensive lineman, but you then have a tight end, or if it's wham, a trap, it's an offensive lineman, come in and smash that guy in the face, and you trap him. It's like, ha, you think you won, but you didn't. We just pushed you a different direction. And then typically that creates an inside crease that a running back can go off of. Well, against LA, Derwin James sees that coming, and he attacks where the play is going to go. And Bucky Irving sees that and is like, well, we have the edge sealed too. And he gets outside and he's gone for 18 yards. So you have to be really, really disciplined. Play your gap. Make sure that the cutbacks, the backside C gap on some of these outside stretch plays are covered. So Bucky Irving is he's not Saquon Barkley, but is a Saquon-style runner. He's not a good dirty runner where he's going to pick up 5-6 yards, much like Rico Dowdle did last week for Dallas. So he's just going to plow it up in there and get what's blocked and maybe fall forward 2 extra yards. He is a boom or bust, big-time hitter. And you have to be scared of that if you're Joe Witt, not to mention the screen game, like you mentioned. The screen game for Tampa has been the best in the NFL all year, something that Joe Witt is well aware of.
Well, they have a really good offensive line that gets out right now. So when they get out, they get their bigs on people's littles, and they create voids for people to go. They have a number of different type of screens. You have the play action screen, the slip screen, the cross screen, all those to the backs, and then you have the ones that the tunnel screen, tear screen from the outside. So they have just a variety of different screens and different ways to get into it, and then they get in and they go with it. And so
they get in, they go, and they seem to go a long, long way. Again, Mayfield, the leading passer in the NFL on passes behind the line of scrimmage, and the structure of this screen game is one of the reasons why Liam Cohen is going to be a hot topic or a hot commodity on the head coach market, likely as things heat up after the Bucs ultimately lose, which we hope happens on Sunday.
Number 6.
All due respect. Speaking of respect, I don't know if Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore respect each other. I do know that they have had some wars over the years. And Marshawn Lattimore has won a lot of those wars. Lattimore has held Evans catchless in 5 of their 13 career matchups. And they actually did play earlier this year when Lattimore was in New Orleans and healthy. And it was the first time in Lattimore's career against Evans that he didn't actually wind up shadowing him basically the entire game. It's the first time that he hasn't covered him on, I believe it's over 50% of snaps in their 13 career matchups. Evans has been below all of his career averages in the games against Lattimore, and I think a huge reason why is Lattimore is a big, strong dude who has tremendous play strength. And so where Evans can bully a lot of corners in the NFL, Lattimore is just not one of those guys. So knowing that, knowing the history, knowing what he's got out there in Marshawn Lattimore, assuming that he plays, how do you handle the matchup between those two if you're the guy coaching Lattimore, Joe Witt Jr.?
Well, we're just focused about winning the game. Hopefully Marshawn will be available. And once we get that word, we'll handle that from that standpoint. But there's nothing wrong with having 2 competitive players go out there and compete against each other. And both guys, they do it the right way for the most part. So if they get lined up across from each other, they'll go at it, and which they should.
They sure will. The question is, what does go at it mean? And when he talks about, they do the right things for the most part. The not most part parts have often been against each other, but it's a playoff game. And I think the one thing that if it starts to get chippy, if I'm Dan Quinn, I pull Lattimore aside and I go, hey, man, you're amazing. I love how much you fight, but I need you to make sure that if anything goes down, you don't get ejected. Just don't get thrown out of this game. Be physical, be chippy. If he punches you, we'll deal with it with the refs. The refs do not get thrown out of this game. He is too important to this team. But Evans is super important to what they do for Tampa. Jalen McMillan has really come on, but without Chris Godwin, that passing game takes a huge hit, and they take a huge hit in the red zone and on third down without Evans. That is really where he shines these days. It's not down in, down out like the peak of Mike Evans' career. But in those biggest of moments, they find ways to get him where they want. And it's going to be on Lattimore, Witt, and the Commanders to make sure that that doesn't happen at the success that happened in the first game where Tampa was like 85% or something ridiculous on third downs. That's Witt. That's Cliff. You got all you need on a Thursday. That's what we do for you. Pick 6 style, Wednesdays and Thursdays here on the Hoffman Show. Fridays, pick 6. We'll pick the 6 players outside of the quarterbacks that we think are most important to the game. So tune in for that tomorrow. Also tomorrow, Trevor Sikkema, Pro Football Focus, joins us at 4:30. And Anthony, who do we got? We have someone at 5 tomorrow. Who am I forgetting about at 5 o'clock tomorrow?
I know tomorrow, 4:30, we have somebody. We have Trevor Sikkema.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Oh, tomorrow.
Or is 5 one of the times I sent you for the guests that were
Yeah.
We're going to have someone good at 5 o'clock tomorrow. I just don't know if it's someone local that is great that we definitely are going to have, or whether it's someone who's national who's great that we're not sure we're going to have yet. So tune in tomorrow at 5 o'clock to find out. Coming up next, Anthony, what are we doing next?
College football.
We do have college football tonight. We'll take a look at the playoff preview tonight, and then real things to close the show coming up here on the Team 980. the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. All right, coming up on tomorrow's show, we told you we got a bunch of great stuff. We'll also have our game picks for the wildcard weekend, and we're working on a couple things. I think JP is going to be joining us tomorrow. I'll tell people, one of the people that might be at 5 o'clock tomorrow, might be another time, is James Paul Finley. I can't remember if that's actually what JP stands for. But when Danny does it over there down the hall at the Fan, he just picks a different J and different P every time.
I thought you were talking about somebody else.
Who'd you think I was talking about?
Eminem.
Yeah, no, he's the other one that we don't know.
Oh, yeah, okay. So
but
we
I feel
have two.
confident saying that JP Finley, who might be listening right now, he often does, is going to join us tomorrow. Because we talked about having JP earlier in the week, but it was his daughter's birthday, and we're like, go be with your daughter. So we'll do that tomorrow at a time TBD, depending on if this other big look, if it's a big name national guest that's gonna knock JP Finley out of Not My Beat, you know it's a pretty big guest. So we'll see what we can do on that tomorrow. You also get some Take Command preview from old Logie Paulson. I thought today's preview podcast was one of the best ones we've done all year. It was playoff caliber, you might say, Anthony. Speaking of playoff caliber, tonight on ESPN, you have Notre Dame and Penn State. College football playoff semifinal. It's at the Orange Bowl down in Miami. It's supposed to be a good one, Anthony. Penn State, just a 1-point favorite. You got any big-time thoughts on this one? As our resident college football guy, you know, we tried to let Denton be our college football guy, and then I feel like he picked every game, every upset that he thought might happen was a blowout.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'd be like that. Predicting college football is hard, man.
It is. I feel like for this game, this is a game where I want to see Penn State win a big game because typically, since they're in the Big Ten, they usually have to play Ohio State, Michigan. One of those teams are, usually running the Big Ten. So we never really see Penn State at the top. And I just want to see them go out there and try to get a dub. But ultimately, if I had to pick a team to win this game, I would probably lean Notre Dame. I just feel like this is their year. The defense has been playing extremely well. Yeah, that's more so who I would give an early lean to.
I mean, they beat Georgia, who they were definitely not favored to beat.
Nope.
And they did it in many ways on the back of Riley Leonard. By the way, Georgia's quarterback, Carson Beck, entering the transfer portal. Everyone thought he was going to the NFL draft because he said he was going to the NFL draft, and now he's going in the transfer portal. So NIL strikes again, where he's like, I can get an extra year of college money and be in college and probably make more than I will as a not first-round pick because I was kind of bad this year. I think I'll do that. Good business decision, Carson. But Riley Leonard, huge scramble game for him. Had 80 yards rushing against Georgia, which gets them into this game against Penn State, who won quite handily in their first-round matchup. And I think it comes down, here's your stunning piece of college football / football analysis, Anthony. Which quarterback has the better day? Can Leonard actually air it out a little bit, or is he just running around all the time? And, if he runs around all the time, is that good enough? Or Aller, the kid from Penn State, who a lot of people like quite a bit because he's pretty good as a college football player. In a year where it doesn't feel like there's a great dominant quarterback, because there's just not. This year's quarterback class in the draft isn't very good. There's some guys maybe next year that are a little younger that some people like some. But, can one of these quarterbacks make a run? And that's kind of my question for the entirety of the college football playoff field that is remaining. The four teams, obviously Notre Dame, Penn State tonight, and we got Ohio State, Texas tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. No matter who wins this game, I think the winner of Friday's game is ultimately going to win. What do I know? Ohio State has looked incredible. They've been dominating everybody they've played. I think they beat both teams by at least 20. And then you got Texas. That Texas-Arizona State game, oh, my gosh. Definitely a hell of a game. But, yeah, I just feel like the winner of tomorrow's game is probably going to end up taking home the title.
I could definitely see that, and a lot of it comes down to the quarterback play. Like Will Howard's been really good for Ohio State. And they also have this kid Jeremiah Smith, the receiver,
Filthy.
who
Freshman.
I heard. Who was it? It was Matt Miller from ESPN, who, remember, the current Heisman winner, who's one of the greatest athletes we've ever seen play college football, and is potentially going to be a non-quarterback number 1 pick in the NFL draft, is Travis Hunter, right? So he might play corner, he might play receiver. He'd be a number 1, a top 5 pick at either one. And Matt Miller, whose job it is to cover the NFL draft for ESPN, said that if Jeremiah Smith at 18 years old right now was in the upcoming draft, he'd be the number 1 pick. That's how good that kid is.
He is as advertised, man. The kid is special. And he just catches everything. And a lot of people were talking about, him filling big shoes coming in for Marvin Harrison. Man, I would not be surprised if he shatters every, Ohio State record. Granted, he's probably only going to be there for 3 years, so he probably won't be able to get
he had
everyone.
1,200 yards this year, so he's on to a freaking good start.
Yeah, he's off to a fantastic start. But he's scary, bro. He is scary. And we thought Ibuka was going to be the main guy. He's the number 1 receiver there.
Yeah. And then meanwhile, Texas, it's which Quinn Ewers are we going to get this week, or is it going to be Arch coming off the bench? It's just a wacky team, man.
Yeah, I don't like how they, play Ewers 3 drives and then bring Arch in for 2 and then goes back. It's a little freaky to me. I don't like it.
It is, but I guess it's working. They're in the semifinals. 13-2 on the season. Top team in the SEC. So we will see what it goes. By the way, there's a story that's come out. They're about to do a story on it on game day. Apparently, Riley Leonard, the quarterback for Notre Dame, his mom texts him, "You suck," before every single game. It started in high school because too many people were saying, "Hey, you're awesome, you're great," and he was like, "I need someone to keep me grounded." And so he talked to his mom about it, and whatever the solution was, I'm sure game day will have a much better version of this story. But the solution was essentially his mom texting him, "You suck," before every single game, as a way to stay humble and grounded. Should we? I don't think that would work well for me. If my mom texted me, "You suck," before every single show, it'd be a little different because it'd be daily instead of weekly. I'd be like, "Mom, you can chill. We're good."
I think younger me wouldn't have been able to handle that. But me, at my big age now, I think I can handle it.
You're big age now?
Yeah.
You're a big kid now?
Yep.
I'm a
the
big
kid
2'8",
now. Man.
Almost as old as Marcus Mariota.
Oh, my gosh.
Throwback from earlier in the show. That's why you got to listen to every second, every single day. It's required to get all the jokes, which is really what this show's about. All right. When we get back, we'll wrap things up with real things real people said into real microphones. And a quick thought on the other NFL executive move that was made today, which I'll tell you about in Trending right now. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. BetMGM tonight coming at you in just a few here on the Team 980. Just real quick, I am very intrigued that the Las Vegas Raiders have fired general manager Tom Telesco. The team announced it on Thursday, just 2 days after they fired Antonio Pierce in his first full season as the coach. The statement very simply read, "We appreciate Tom's efforts in helping build a foundation for the future. We wish Tom and his family all of the best." This will be the fifth general manager since they fired Reggie McKenzie at the end of 2018. They have Mike Mayock, Dave Ziegler, Champ Kelly is an interim, and then Telesco. I mean, they signed Gardner Minshew and went Aiden O'Connell and Desmond Ridder out at quarterback. Like, it was a bad year. He did do a good job in the draft, which is kind of his thing, right? Brock Bowers seems like a good pick. Jackson Powers-Johnson started at left guard and center for them. Good job. They got DJ Glaze, who was their starter at right tackle in the third round. So I think that is very, very interesting. That kind of the reason that the guy got hired, he did a pretty good job at. But I think what it speaks to is something that I've been talking about with Cliff Kingsbury over the last couple of days of why I wouldn't want any of these jobs. I don't think it's good for a coach to be misaligned with the GM. I wouldn't say I would always hire a coach and a GM together. But, like, if I'm going to fire one but not the other, there better be a hell of a reason. And I better make sure that the next guy that comes in to replace the one that I fired is on board with how the team sees, or with how the other sees football. Because I think of, for instance, in Jacksonville, how Shad Khan thinks it's this amazing thing that both the GM and the head coach report to him directly. And it's like, then you just have a guy, like, I mean, to use the old Parcells analogy, oh, let me buy the groceries because I'm the one making the meal. You don't necessarily need to be the one who buys the groceries, but you can't have a dude who's buying you ingredients for, like, Mexican food if you're an Italian chef, or the other way around. And that seems to be like Trent Baalke's like, I've assembled this amazing roster and they can't coach it. And it's like, look at what's happening here in Washington. Dan Quinn is like, I need X. And Adam Peters is like, allow me to go find you X. And what this does, even though Telesco might be a really valuable piece to a front office somewhere, because he clearly has a pretty good scouting eye and mind, some of the young talent that he left behind with the Chargers, and obviously a pretty good draft seemingly that he had in his 1 year in Vegas, you need to get guys that are aligned. And this allows them to go out and recruit GM and head coach candidates that might have a relationship, or at the very least know of each other, a la Dan Quinn and Adam Peters, and have that alignment. So I would say, even though Telesco might deserve a little bit better, this is a smart move by the Raiders, especially considering the market where the only other team that's got this opportunity is the Jets, and they stink.
Real things.
We're not going to be so this year.
Real people.
5-11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
All right, every single year, the Commanders press corps gives what they call the Good Guy Award, which will be explained further by John Keim in this segment. Thanks to Scott Abraham for the sound. Your Good Guy Award winner for 2024, despite a haterade sip from Jaden Daniels, is...
It's for the Washington media. We always take a vote every year about the guy who's helps us the most in our jobs. The Good Guy Award winner for this year is Bobby Wagner.
Man,
so appreciate that.
Thank you. Come on. Insane work. Do better.
But in all seriousness, just because when in the spring I remember talking to guys and they'd be like, you say, oh, Bobby Wagner's here. Bobby Wagner. For a guy of your stature, you're as normal as can be. And it's just a regular guy to deal with, and we really appreciate that. Just from regular conversations in the locker room to dealing with us out here, the insight you give us is very appreciated, but just the manner in which you conduct yourself is awesome. So that's why you were an easy winner for this.
I really appreciate it. I'm grateful. You guys have been amazing to work with. Hopefully, it's not the last time I see you guys. So.
Yeah, for sure. Congrats.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Congratulations to Bobby Wagner. Of all the awards that he's won in his career, Anthony, that's one of them.
Do you think that's the biggest award he's won outside of the Super Bowl?
No. I mean, he's won some pretty tremendous stuff.
I know.
Bobby has won, like, he really is. I mean, I remember, look, Adrian Peterson's life off the field has careened in a million different ways. But, like, there was that moment where, like, holy crap, this is Adrian Peterson in that locker room. And his life hadn't quite careened all the way that it has careened now. So that was still had a little bit more cachet. But we'll talk about more of that another time because the show's over and I forgot what time it ends, and it ended 5 seconds ago. See you tomorrow.